Hello and welcome to Shattered Lives, Reach Ireland's crime podcast. Here we are again in the office in a different location now. Almost feels like we're at a bar without all the fun.
If he throws the head on me, we'll definitely be in a bar. Anyway.
Well, we've had people say to us our podcast sounds like two lads talking in a bar, so this is a bit of an experiment. We're talking about the year in crime, and it's been an extraordinary year, and we wanted to first start with, I suppose, the only gangland shooting of the year, fatal gangland shooting of Josh Itseli. It happened on the 6th of May, it happened in Drimna, and that was a particularly shocking incident because we woke up to that and we heard about a AR-15 rifle being used.
Yeah, so it's interesting on a lot of levels, but you're right, it is the only gangland gun killing of the year. And I mean, as I said in previous podcasts, on some occasions there were 26 gun murders in Ireland in a year. So it shows you the reduction there have been. In the whole of Ireland, all 32 counties, up to, at the minute, there have been 3 gun killings. One of them was in a gangland one in the Republic, and that was of Josh Itseli. There was another one in the Republic, but it's fair to say it's not gangland related. So it's really, really interesting in that when we first heard about this, I think it's fair to say that we thought Mr. Itseli was shot by rival criminals.
Yeah.
But it later emerged that it wasn't.
Yeah, so I remember going to the scene, and it was a particularly shocking, shooting in that the body was still there on the road. And we knew that it was a young lad, but at that stage we didn't really know the circumstances. It obviously had all the appearances of a gangland killing. But the exact circumstances of what had happened wasn't clear because there seemed to be 2 vehicles involved, and there was talk that basically the victim was possibly the perpetrator of the original incident. And as we found out, basically this gang had arrived to carry out an attack, and in the midst of that attack, Josh Itseli was shot by this AR-15 rifle. We found out that it was actually an associate of his who was in the car with him who fired that rifle and accidentally shot his own man.
So they were on their way to probably do a pipe bomb on a house.
Yeah.
I think a pipe bomb was found at the scene. It appears that the intended targets, who were low-level criminals from South Inner City Dublin, became aware of this and basically decided the best form of defence was to attack. So they essentially, the belief that Gardaí have would be that they essentially ambushed them as they were on their way to ambush them. And in the confusion, one of Josh Itseli's associates who did have this, we can talk about this, the AR-15 in a while, it's a military-grade assault rifle. He basically fired the gun repeatedly, and Mr. Itseli was shot. And I think he died at the scene.
He did. Yeah.
Okay. So it was really significant on a number of reasons. Firstly, young kids. Josh Itseli was, if I'm right, he was 20.
Yep.
He was not part of the killings. He was not part of any of these, the family or major crime gangs. He was part of a young crew.
Yeah.
Relatively junior crew, relatively minor criminals. How are they getting their hands on an AR-15?
That was the first question. I mean, it nearly kind of superseded the tragedy itself of obviously life was lost, but I think everybody was a bit stunned with the involvement of an AR-15, which is an American-style rifle, and you often hear about it in these school shooting incidents. How exactly did young lads like that have a powerful weapon like that? And indeed, it was actually found near to the scene by kids, and there was a horrific video of the gun actually being taken down from a hedge by Gardaí. Now, thankfully, it was called in, but the kids actually discovered this. So you can imagine the sight of your 10-year-old child looking up at this weapon, this deadly weapon in a bush.
But can you imagine if you're a Garda and you come up against somebody with an AR-15? Listeners will know that all Gardaí have body armour.
Yep.
They're called ballistic vests. People think it's a stab vest, but it has a ballistic capability. It is supposed to, or its specs say that it can stop a shotgun blast and it can stop, from a certain range, a 9mm bullet. So a Glock or a macro, they're all 9mm pistols. Now, without getting Anaraki,
slightly.
the body armour required to stop the AR-15 has a 5.56mm round. Okay, the body armour required to stop that. Only the Garda Emergency Response Unit. I'm not sure about the ARU, but ERU definitely have them. It has plates. You see journalists on war zones have them. We have one. You go, and it's got these plates. They're ceramic plates, and they can stop Kalashnikov rounds and 5.56 rounds. Most Gardaí do not have them. So if any of the guards had been shot at that incident, it would have gone through the body armour. So there was a huge level of concern. Now, that's not the first AR-15 that has been seized in Ireland.
Yeah.
Several have been seized, but it's a new departure that someone has been murdered with this. And I think Gardaí were very, very concerned by that development.
It says a lot, doesn't it, though, that ultimately the person who was killed here was actually an associate of the person firing the gun, that it tells you the level of maybe expertise they had in firing such a weapon, how foolish they probably were with it. We know that that person then fled the country. Now they're in custody in relation to other matters, so we have to be careful about identifying them. But that person is well known to Gardaí, involved in gangland at a serious level, obviously. But
not
it's difficult.
Serious.
It's difficult to know where this will go in terms of any potential charges, because obviously he didn't intend to kill his own friend, they think. Anyway.
Yes, so it's safe to say that it has been treated as a murder inquiry, but guards don't decide charges. That'll be for the DPP, as we've spoken about before. So, I would anticipate there will be a file to the Director of Public Prosecutions. There's a significant amount of evidence because they have clothes and everything and fingerprints and all. I wouldn't be surprised if the DPP directed a charge of manslaughter. Now, that can still technically mean life.
Yep.
Very, very rare is life handed down for manslaughter. And I think most objective observers, including Gardaí, would accept that he did not mean to harm Josh Itseli and he did not mean to kill him. Yeah. So that's going to have a bearing on what charges may be down the road. But I think the real issue, the real scary issue is the availability of AR-15 weapons like this. I mean, that's a whole new ballgame.
And who's bringing them in? I mean, there's talk now of, and in fairness, another publication published it, but there's talk of the possible involvement of Brian Rattigan, obviously a notorious crime figure, and that Gardaí might want to speak to him in relation to this overall incident, what exactly his role is. But I mean, certainly whoever brought those weapons in is someone who has contacts, who has, significant involvement in organised crime. And it's not just kids. I mean, while the kids obviously had access to it, clearly someone at a more senior level is bringing this stuff in.
And we know that weapons are usually smuggled in alongside drug shipments, part of drugs consignments. But I mean, I can remember Glocks would be found, Uzis would be found, Ingram Mac-10 machine pistols would be recovered, but not
an AR-15.
Yeah. Now, there have been a couple of incidents, non-terrorist related, where, I remember a Kalashnikov was seized by guards from Kevin Street. And there have been, I think, probably 4 other AR-15s have been seized, a couple in Finglas, and around the country. But this is a whole new ballgame.
Well, I'm thinking of, just as you mentioned that, following that incident, and again, this is something that's before the courts, but I think there were similar type weapons found that you have to basically construct and put together. So the components of an AR-15, and there are people before the courts in relation to that. But obviously they're almost effectively being mailed in parts, and then they're being constructed when they get here.
And there's another big issue that is coming down the road. I was listening to BBC Radio 4, had a really interesting show about this in the last couple of days. 3D printing. I think the weapon that your man Mangione allegedly used in New York.
Oh, in New York, yeah.
I think that was...
Yeah.
It was a 3D, it's called a ghost gun. I think it may have been 3D printed, but there are 3D firearms that can be 3D printed. Now, that's a whole new, totally devastating and totally frightening scenario. And Radio 4, they were talking about even possibly having the capability to 3D print bullets. So if that happens, we're all in trouble. So firearms, Ireland has really, really strict firearms laws. Hard to get them in. Guards are always jubilant when they take a firearm off the street. It's a big thing for a guard to take a firearm off the street. But can you imagine if somebody in Ireland starts making them?
It's scary.
So technology is great, but technology can be really dangerous as well.
Well, I mean, this was a scary incident. I mean, you're talking about kids, really. I mean, I know Josh Itseli was 20, but really he was a child. And to be involved in crime, to be going out that day to put down a pipe bomb, for his associate to be carrying a weapon of that calibre, we've obviously entered into a new era of gangland that you or I haven't seen the likes of. Now, thankfully, no other lives have been lost with a weapon of this kind so far, touch wood. But we're obviously entering into a new era of gangland where you've got young kids getting involved in crime at a very early age with access to powerful weapons.
And they're being desensitised, and they think that AR-15s are a bit of crack, and it's only when something happens that they realise how they are deadly. So, look, there are plenty of feuds going on. Some are big, some are small, but they don't have access to firearms. If they get access to firearms, then we're in trouble. Where did Josh Itseli and his crew get that gun? That's a real departure.
That's the question. Shall we talk about Cathal Crotty?
Yes.
One of the bigger stories of the year again, and a real watershed moment, I suppose, in terms of the reaction to it. Cathal Crotty obviously was a member of the Defence Forces, and he's 22 years of age. He's from Ardnacrusha in County Clare, and this attack happened in Limerick. He attacked a woman by the name of Natasha O'Brien in May 2022 in Limerick, and he brutally beat her in an unprovoked attack. And the facts of it, I think, shocked the country. But really, the most shocking aspect of it, obviously, was the suspended sentence that Cathal Crotty got, and the reaction to that was massive. I mean, unprecedented. I mean, widely condemned, even with the involvement of the Minister for Justice getting, and ultimately now the DPP are appealing that sentence, and it's possibly going to go before the court again next year, where he might find himself possibly being landed in a jail cell. But I think is one of the things that I remember about this that was extraordinary. Obviously, this judge is now retired, and judges make decisions all the time, and that has to be respected to a degree. But this judge made an extraordinary decision in that he spared Cathal Crotty jail, if I recall correctly, because he wanted him to be able to still have a career in the Defence Forces. But ultimately, the Defence Forces booted him out anyway.
Yeah. And I always say this, judges are the only people who see all the evidence.
Yeah.
Apart from jury trials. So he has access to everything that we don't. But from the outside, it's easy to understand why people were so shocked and disturbed by that sentence. Now, it is being appealed. I think there's a very good likelihood that the Court of Criminal Appeal will impose a criminal or a sentence on who's now Mr. Crotty. But you're right. Look, I write about the Defence Forces. I know that they had zero. Speaking to sources, military sources about this man, they had zero support for him. They had zero respect for him, and they wanted rid of him as quickly as they could. So there was no love lost there. It wasn't as if they were trying to, he made a mistake. This was a vicious and sustained attack, and they had no sympathy for him.
And a senior ranking officer had to give evidence in that trial, that they were obliged to do so in terms of speaking about his career in the Defence Forces. But it's not as though, as you say, it's not as though someone was there deliberately singing his praises. It wasn't a character witness. But that obviously influenced the judge in making his decision. I wonder, does he regret that now? Because the reaction seems to be overwhelmingly, there should have been a custodial sentence in this case.
Obviously, everybody feels sorry for Miss O'Brien, and she's become a real brave person. I did have sympathy for I think it was a captain. Because under the defence regulations, he had to do that. And he was asked questions, and he's under oath, he has to give truthful answers, and it was that Cathal Crotty's career was satisfactory.
Yeah.
So it was sort of hard on the captain, because there was a wave of criticism of the Defence Force, principally, I suppose, by people who weren't really aware of how the system works. And that poor officer, he did have to go in there. But it was really interesting for me to see the public reaction to this. I think sometimes, judges and even journalists, we go from one story to one story to one story. And even for our mental health, it's probably a good idea not to stop and dwell about it. But cases like this show that what we cover has a real impact.
There's been a lot of those types of stories this year. That's what I was saying when we started this, that there's been extraordinary incidents this year that have really opened up a national conversation, and this is one of them. And that whole issue of how these violent assaults are treated, that's all open for discussion now. And in terms of even the severity of those sentences, that's something that the Minister is openly talking about. I just remember going to Cathal Crotty's house and trying to ask him for comment, and it wasn't really so much his reaction that shocked me, but it was the reaction of his father, who blamed the media and said basically it's the media's fault is the reason why he's been treated the way he's been treated, and why he's effectively going to lose his job in the Defence Forces. Cathal told us obviously he wanted to go back into the Defence Forces, and he said he didn't trust me and thought that I would twist his words, and ultimately was basically telling me to F off. He was quite belligerent and upset, and look, he's a young fella, and he probably has, this has been difficult, I'm sure, for him, but there's not a lot of sympathy, I'm sure, for him, and rightly so. He's now facing the prospect of potentially up to a year in prison, I think, with this. But look, we'll have to see what happens when that comes before the court. But I think, this is just one of those stories that kind of stopped everyone in their tracks, really, didn't it?
It's stories like this come along and they just blew up. And you hear about it and you go, oh. But I was taken aback by the reaction.
Yeah.
Stories like this, they do take on a life of their own. It was on Liveline, and when something's on Liveline, it's pretty serious, and it was on for quite a few days, and people were giving their stories.
This has come up before. It's a whole topic of conversation about how judges treat things. I mean, there is stuff in the statute of, the guidelines for what a potential sentence is for, but it's ultimately the discretion of the judge, isn't it? And a different judge could decide completely differently. But even if he gets a custodial sentence, it's probably not going to be, he's probably only going to serve a couple of months, realistically, isn't he? But I think it's more just the message that it sends, setting somebody free when they've committed such an unprovoked attack. I mean, it's just, again, look, that judge is retired and he won't have to make the decision again. But I question how many judges really would have made that decision not to jail him. But anyway.
Even on a totally separate thing, we're used to men who are convicted of possessing child sex abuse material.
Getting suspended sentences.
It's unheard of for them really to get suspended, and I was shocked in a pleasant sort of way. There was a man over in Sligo, he got a 6-year sentence.
Well, that was a very serious case, wasn't it? Yeah.
The judge was not messing there. But I was really surprised because I've covered child sex abuse material since Operation Amethyst in 2002, which was the first big Garda operation on it. There weren't that many men, always men, there weren't that many men jailed. And even if they were jailed, it was a couple of months. He got 6 years.
Yeah, and I see an awful lot of criticism in particular for Judge Martin Nolan. Martin Nolan oversees the very court that hears most of these cases. So he's getting the brunt of the criticism. But really, I mean, if you're in any way going to be before the courts on this issue, you're more than likely going to appear before Martin Nolan. Yeah. So he hears these cases day in, day out. And he's obviously made the decision that in most of these cases, especially for a first-time offence, you're not going to go to jail. You're going to get a slap on the wrist. That's his right. I think in our society there is a real problem with this issue. And I don't know, if you were to jail every paedophile, would you have space for anybody else?
No, you definitely wouldn't. It's a massive problem. I remember speaking to Gardaí involved in this, and they're hard bitten. Yeah. They've seen it all, and they're shocked by the level. And I remember one detective telling me, in a lot of cases, you would think, okay, somebody was caught with 10 images of a child being raped. That's what CSAM is, right? Yeah. But in a lot of cases, they have hundreds of thousands of videos and images, thousands of victims, and it's just so accessible for them.
It's scary.
It's very scary.
Talk about Cobalt. Obviously, again,
this is scary as well.
Another extraordinary story. If you were to go back in time and tell yourself some of the stories that have happened this year, you wouldn't believe it. And this is one of them. That there is a Russian agent in the Oireachtas, allegedly, that this person who is a serving member of the Oireachtas, an elected representative, is allegedly a Russian asset. This story by John Mooney, it broke in October, and he labelled this person Cobalt. He gave them that nickname. To this day, as the recording of this podcast, we still don't publicly know the identity of, well, we know who it is, and a lot of people know who it is, allegedly is, but this person hasn't come forward. This person hasn't in any way admitted. They've denied, flatly denied.
You contacted them, didn't you?
No, I didn't actually. In the end, no.
Oh, I did.
You did.
I did. Sorry, I did.
Yeah.
I sent someone a message.
What did they say to you?
No answer was the loud reply. But and it's a very smart move. I can remember ages ago trying to chase, totally unconnected to this, not even a very serious criminal thing, but he was a personality. I'll tell you when we're finished. we just wanted to go and talk to you, right?
Yeah.
And there were several newspapers after him, and he just blanked all of us. And that meant we couldn't write anything, because if he doesn't give any comment, we are totally defenceless.
Yeah.
And it was the same with Cobalt. He just, I'm not going to say brazened it out, but he has ridden it out rather spectacularly and successfully.
Yeah.
I thought...
I mean, he hasn't been exposed. I thought within days he would be.
Well, yes. So I thought another parliamentarian was going to use Oireachtas privilege to name him. And there was fevered speculation for a day or two that was going to happen, but it didn't. So he seems to have ridden the storm, but some people laughed at this. I think it's a very serious story. And I was doing a bit of digging, and I established that when Leo Varadkar was Taoiseach, he was briefed about this. Now, he was briefed informally about this.
Because Micheál Martin did try to dismiss it because he didn't seem to be aware of it.
Yes. I know for a fact, speaking to someone very close to Leo Varadkar, that he was briefed about this, and he knows the person's name, and he got a briefing. I think I know who briefed him. It wasn't, so the two arms of state security are Garda Síochána and military intelligence. I think I'd be pretty happy that what happened was that one of those organisations briefed the person who briefed Leo Varadkar. I'll put it that way. So Leo Varadkar was told about it, and he knows that person's name.
And the allegation is that this person supposedly was honey trapped, so to speak, that a female was introduced and this person had their ego massaged, so to speak, and they've effectively been...
That's another name for it.
They've effectively been coerced by the Russians and are giving them information.
Yes.
Effectively.
It's so, in media shorthand, it's called a spy. Right? I think it's more accurate, and to be fair to Mooney, he used this term, an agent of influence. This man...
He probably doesn't consider himself to be a spy. He probably thinks what he's doing is legit.
And he doesn't have access to states. There are state secrets. We do have state secrets. He doesn't have access to them. Yeah. But he's in a good enough position where he can hear things, he can influence things.
Yeah. Well, he's an elected representative.
And he's in the heart of the democracy. So, now, I was speaking to some sources when it blew up, and they confirmed the story, and they said, look, the Russians probably regarded him as a useful idiot. But the idiot isn't the important word, the useful is. He was of use to them. And, if you look at Romania, where, the allegation is that Russia is heavily involved in elections there, the Supreme Court got involved. Russia is about, the allegation would be that Russia is about disrupting on so many different levels. Yeah. And so, the allegation is that this person was an agent of influence, not a spy, an agent of influence.
Interesting. We should probably move on to other interesting characters, and we should talk about Ian Bailey. Obviously, Ian Bailey died on the 21st of January this year. That was probably the first big story to break this year. We knew he was unwell. He'd had multiple heart attacks. I interviewed him myself about one of the heart attacks he suffered, and he was in hospital when I was talking to him. I remember that. So it didn't really come as a shock that he died. But I think the timing of it was incredible, because I think that Gardaí are coming to a crucial point in their investigation into the murder of Sophie Toscan de Plantier, and they were coming to the point where they were possibly going to interview Ian Bailey. They hadn't got around to it, but it was coming to that stage, so he was under an awful lot of pressure, and then he dropped dead on the street. So we'll never really know, I think, what would have come out of those interviews. Now, will we know once and for all at the end of this cold case investigation whether or not he murdered Miss Toscan de Plantier, or will there be evidence that convinces people one way or the other? The one thing we do know is he's still the only suspect to this day.
Yes, and so I was speaking to sources about this after he died. The investigation is ongoing, it hasn't stopped. And what the sort of blueprint, I think, or the route map is that the guards will send a file to the Director of Public Prosecutions, even though he's dead. And what they're hoping for is that the DPP will say, based on the evidence, I believe there would be enough evidence to sustain a prosecution. Okay? So, in other words, we think this is armed. The state has examined the evidence. Remember, the DPP twice looked at the case and twice said no.
Yeah.
But there has been a bit of a change, I think, and Gardaí would believe that, say cases like Grindoir, Joe Riley's circumstantial evidence, and it's about building up the strands to create a rope.
Yeah.
And there would be a belief that there may have been enough circumstantial evidence to sustain a prosecution. And I think what the guards are hoping for, and the Plantier family are hoping for, is that the DPP will say, based on what we have, if Mr. Bailey was alive, he would have been charged.
I mean, I'm not privy to what's going on in the Garda investigation, but certainly from sources, my understanding of the situation would be that they're very much, and this doesn't come as a surprise, I'm sure, to people, that they're looking back at everything that Ian Bailey ever said, that he ever wrote, and basically trying to catch him out in a lie, effectively, because he's given multiple accounts over the years of where he was and who he was with, and, did he or did he not know Miss Toscan de Plantier? In particular, that issue, he has gone back and forth on that. Indeed, in podcasts I did with him, he accepted it might be possible that he might have met her, even though he maintained that he hadn't. I think that's a significant point for Gardaí. If they can prove that Ian Bailey met Sophie Toscan de Plantier, that they knew each other, which has long been suspected, and indeed friends of Sophie have said she knew him and in fact she was afraid of him. If they can prove that, I think that's the first major lie that they've caught him in.
What did you make of him?
He was one of the weirdest people I've ever interviewed or met, but he was fascinating. He would always pick up the phone whenever I phoned Ian Bailey. I would always get Ian Bailey, and he was always happy to talk, unless he was in a particular spot of trouble. He was an extraordinarily tall man. I think if you met him, you would have been taken aback by, Jesus, he's quite tall and quite intimidating. And I think in his younger days, I'm sure he was intimidating to women. Eccentric, weird, narcissistic, fascinating, yeah. And again, similar to a lot of the people we often talk about, probably would have been fun to go for a pint with, but there was a dark secret there, I think, that he kept and brought to his grave. I would struggle to believe that anybody else was responsible. He had a lot of very strange things that he did in the aftermath of that, the supposed burning of the coat, and just, I mean, you could go, the list goes on and on of the very strange circumstances that tie him to that murder. I just think that he was, I think he believed he could ride out the storm, and that, he had enough public support that even if he went on trial, no one would ever really believe that he did it.
Do you know the way I have a rule that I don't give opinions? Because it's Christmas, can I break that?
Well, we often give opinions on this.
Oh, no, I try. No, I don't really. You do. I don't. Anyway, look. There was something that happened in the whole Ian Bailey, Sophie Toscan de Plantier saga, which in a way has been overlooked, and I think it's really, really important. He was convicted in absentia in France.
Yeah.
So the DPP twice in Ireland said no charges, lads. The murder happened in Ireland. He was an Irish citizen of English nationality. I find it extremely troubling that any judicial authority can go, right, we're going to, the Irish authorities who investigated it, and it happened in Ireland, have said no charge, we're going to charge him. I find that really troubling.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, actually. I think that was odd, yeah. And I think, but I think there...
It was very damaging. It was worse than odd. It was hugely damaging, I thought, to democracy.
But there's an acceptance now, I think, that the initial Garda investigation was flawed, and that I think that the way that they're looking at it now is very different to the way that they looked at it back in 1996. I think that they'll come to a more conclusive finding, looking at all of the evidence, statements over the years. And I don't know about DNA. I think it's probably too late for that.
I don't know. There are advances.
There are advances, yeah.
Every year on DNA.
Well, I'm thinking of the gate. The fact that the gate ended up being lost effectively.
It wasn't lost. See,
well,
this is a myth.
They found it. They found it, but
it was disposed of.
But yes, exactly. And I think that was a mistake. I mean, they could examine that now.
Yes, but it was repeatedly examined, and it wasn't lost.
But with the advances you're talking about now, wouldn't it be valuable to have it? Why destroy it?
Yes, but things like the rock that they have.
Yeah. Because
I know there are experts in America who can extract DNA from rocks and from stone. So there'd be hope in that. But listen, it was December 1996.
Yeah.
So 28 years ago.
Doing the maths, yeah.
28 years ago.
Yeah.
Long time, and it's an enduring mystery. And were Mr. Bailey to have survived that heart attack, we would still be talking about it to this day. It is one of those, because there have been two podcasts, or there have been a podcast about it, two documentary series about it.
And indeed,
how many books?
Gardaí were actually in this office and took a copy on a USB of the podcast interview that I did with Ian Bailey. Again, I think that shows, and I wasn't told anything, but I think that shows that they're looking at all of, because that was one of the last interviews that he kind of did in 2023. They're looking at all of the last things that he said, and he kept a diary, a meticulous diary. He was recording a podcast of his own, so they're looking at all of those statements, all of the things he said in the months leading up to his death. I think there's a belief that he might have slipped up somewhere, but time will tell.
You have to have a really good memory to be a good liar, and I think that is why, especially now with circumstantial evidence and everything, the guards do like to unpick everything that somebody says just to find the holes. And if he was lying, there will have been holes. Yeah. Because you can't go 28 years without lying, basically, or being found out.
We'll see what happens in terms of that going to the DPP. Finally, and a nice light topic to finish with, the far right, Coolock says no. The 15th of July, again, another massive story. Obviously, there has been an ongoing protest of an IPAS centre of refugees coming into the former Crown Pate site in Coolock. And on the 15th of July, it all kicked off. The workers were moved onto the site in the early hours of the morning, and the public order unit left at about 7 a.m. Following that, a bunch of thugs came in, started setting fire to beds, set fire to a JCB. All hell broke loose. Gardaí from all over the city drafted in, and it was chaotic. And it was embarrassing to see that in our capital. Gardaí did their best to deal with it. There were plenty of arrests. There was plenty of criminal damage going on, racism, all kinds of different things. But now the Garda Commissioner accepts, in hindsight, but he didn't accept it at the time, that serious policing mistakes were made in terms of the ultimate call to remove the public order unit at 7 a.m. And indeed, we had sources telling us on the day in question that that was a fatal mistake.
The public order unit are what's called a force multiplier. So if you see a serial, maybe 10 guards wearing their body armour with their long shields, their long batons and their helmets, and there's a line of them, you've seen them in action, haven't you?
Yeah.
You know, they know they're onions.
It's serious, yeah.
And it does send a message, and it does, the guards would say, soften people's coughs. So when you have just regular Gardaí in their soft caps and their high-vis jackets and they're outnumbered, they're in trouble. And, you know, I said this about the November 23 riots last year. The guards lost control of North Inner City Dublin for probably 8 hours.
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say that they were not in control of that area of Coolock for several hours until the public order unit came out.
Yeah. Until about midday.
Yeah, really. And I think the guards have to learn lessons from this. You know, maybe they should sort of hope for the best, prepare for the worst.
We now know that there was an RTE documentary filming everything at the time, and indeed one of the people seen in the protest was being quite racist, using the N-word. We tracked her down. Her name is Tracy Brockham. She said a lot on camera when she didn't know she was being filmed, but when she did know she was being recorded, she said absolutely nothing and refused to apologise for her statements. But, you know, not to single her out, she is just one example, I suppose, of the, I guess, type of person that attended that protest. And then, look, I've said this before and I'll say it again, there are plenty of people, rational, you know, people who have concerns, local people who don't want criminality in their area and have concerns about large groups of men coming into their area, and it's perfectly legitimate for them to peacefully protest in this. We're living in a democracy. But you've got people like that who we call the far right, who are co-opting these things, and, you know, apart from being outright racist, you know, they're actually attacking Gardaí and swelling up hatred. Does that concern you, I suppose, as well? I wonder, just in terms of the rise of that, the rise of the far right.
Yes, I think the best example of the concerns about this is, we had a story a few months ago about the increase in Garda security for ministers. So the Taoiseach has 2 Garda cars, okay, a Garda driver and then what's called an SDU escort car. Yeah. They have increased that. They've given the Taoiseach another escort car. And
they've done this on the basis of this far right threat.
The increased threat
which is
from the far right, Also, Helen McEntee, all ministers have Garda drivers and a Garda car. The Garda driver is what's called a protection officer. It's probably a bit insulting to call them a driver. Their first job is protection officers, but they also drive. What they're now doing for Helen McEntee and Roderick O'Gorman is they've given them an escort car as well. So 2 armed Special Detective Unit Gardaí. Guards are very wary of wasting resources. Yeah. So there must be a really strong reason why they are devoting really specialist Gardaí to protect these guys, and that's because they're worried about threats.
Well, look at even just 2 days after this Coolock incident, Mary Lou McDonald, the Sinn Féin leader, was threatened. And the video went viral, this guy wearing a mask threatening to kill her. Now, that man is before the courts and he denies any kind of wrongdoing as such. But look, we have to respect the courts in that process. But that's just one example of only 2 days after, when that hatred was kind of whipped up, you've got someone on social media saying they're going to shoot and kill an elected leader. So that's, and that had to be taken probably more seriously than it would have been previously.
See, a lot of people argue that the Guards haven't taken the threat of the far right seriously enough. I think they have. I mean, I can remember Tony Howard, when he was the Detective Chief Superintendent in charge of crime security, the spooks.
Yeah.
2000, we broke this story, maybe 2022, they issued an alert because the far right were trying to attack 5G masts. Remember all that stuff about 5G? All that stuff. But they had intelligence that they were, and there was an alert issued to all 14,000 Gardaí in the country to say extra patrols and all 5G masts, and a couple were attacked, but they attacked 4G masks. They just saw masts and they went further. But the Guards, especially SDU and crime security, they've been monitoring the right wing for a long time. I think the problem is there's so many of them. There's a core of really dangerous people, but there are other people who aren't dangerous but who get involved and cause hassle.
And we're seeing now in real time how Gardaí are adapting their strategy to approaching this type of thing. So another extraordinary thing that's happened this year, and it's only recent, is the releasing of 99 images of all of these suspects in the Dublin riots. Persons of interest, we should call them. And now many of them have been ruled out of inquiries since. But what was it like? Because even just seeing it was extraordinary. Being at a press conference where Gardaí were openly releasing pictures of members of the public and saying, "We want you."
It was wow. And it was. I've often thought that the Guards have a very closed attitude. Yeah, closed really. You know, say if you look at England, a lot of English police forces that we'd be in contact with, somebody gets an 18-month sentence, they're released to mugshot. You would never get that. Would never be happening here. So I did read stories that there's GDPR differences or different interpretations of GDPR rules in Ireland and in Britain, so the Guards have got different legal advice. But I mean,
because you'd imagine they probably did have to seek legal advice before they put all those pictures out.
It worked very well because vast majority of those people have been identified, and they were identified within days. So that's a template. But I understand the Guards were nervous about it because there has to be a cultural shift to sort of embrace this sort of stuff. But there's no doubt that it helped the Garda investigation.
But all of that tells us, doesn't it, that they take that threat, so to speak, of a growing far-right movement very, very seriously. I mean, for a national security threat to be reassessed as well, that doesn't happen every day.
No, and so. I mean, there's a security assessment every year, national threat assessment, and the far right was mentioned in that. Now, I have to say, and I keep saying this ad nauseum, people who go and protest, people are entitled to protest about immigration in their own. Yeah. No problem. People who go to protest in Athlone or Newton Kennedy, I think it's unfair to label them all as racist. They have their own reasons, but there are people who have agendas. There is absolutely no doubt about that. Yeah. And I think it's probably unfortunate that anybody who goes to protests is labelled as the far right, but they get caught up in these things. And even say, for example, people who were involved in the November 23rd riots, right? How many of them were just young fellas who saw a chance and went around going for it? Yeah. And that's how complicated this is from a policing perspective to investigate the whole issue of immigration and reactions to it, because it's a multifaceted problem for the Guards.
I think it's something we're going to be talking about for years to come.
Yeah, we'll be talking about it in 2025 anyway.
Okay, right. That's the end of part 2, so thanks again for listening to us. Maybe we'll be in the pub for part 3.